SQL Injection. In this module, we'll demonstrate some of the basic and simple SQL injection executions. Everyone be sure to check out the type of database like MySQL and MS SQL before injecting. Let's begin our tutorial with quick glance on database. What is a database? Database is the application that stores a collection of data. It offers user to store and display data in a well-organized form, so that everyone can use database integrated applications very easily. Most of the database share common syntaxes and it is very easy to use. A simple example of database is authentication, generally known as login page for websites. In this, the owner of the website creates tables with certain rows and columns to store user inputs like usernames and passwords. When user registers for that page, it stores username and password in predefined tables and verifies every time when user logins. There are different types of databases like MySQL, which is an open source one, MS SQL, MS Access, Oracle, PostgreSQL, SQLite, etc. What is SQL injection? SQL injection is probably the most common programming flaw that exists on the internet at present days due to poor programming. It is a vulnerability through which unauthorized person can access various critical as well as private data by inserting some of the malicious SQL strings. It is one of the deadliest as well as easiest attack to execute from remote location. In SQL injection, we interact with database server with various commands and get data from it. Generally, SQL injections are possible because of non-limiting the user inputs and bad implementation of tables. There are mainly two types of SQL injection: classic or error-based SQL injection, blind SQL injection. Bypassing login prompt. Suppose a site has a login form and only the registered users are allowed to enter the site. Now say you want to bypass the login and enter the site as a legitimate user. If login script is not properly sanitized by the programmer, you may have luck to enter the site. You might be able to log in into the site without knowing the real username and real password by just interacting with the database server. We can use some magic SQL strings to bypass the login prompt. Let us see how this happens with example. For this demonstration, I am using rvsgradebook.com. Open rvsgradebook.com in your web browser. Next it will ask username and password to log in. So first we need to check whether this site is injectable with SQL strings or not. To check whether the site is injectable or not, just enter single quotation in the place of user ID and same in the place of password and hit enter. If you find an error report saying SQL server error, then the site is injectable with SQL strings. There are many SQL strings used to bypass the login prompt. To find these strings, open ihc-forums.com and view the strings. Here are the list of strings used to bypass the login prompt. So we should try all the strings to bypass the login prompt. For this demo, I am using 1 or 1 is equals to 1 to bypass the login prompt. In the user ID section, enter the username as admin and password as a string and hit enter. Now we successfully logged in as administrator. In this way we can bypass the login prompt by using SQL string injection. Accessing secret data. SQL injection is not essentially done by bypassing login prompt, but it is also used for accessing the sensitive and secret data in the database server. This process is known as error-based SQL injection. Step 1. Checking for vulnerability. Suppose you got a site like www.site.com/article.php id is equals to 5. First we need to check whether the site is vulnerable or not. To check whether the site is vulnerable or not, just add single quotation at the end of the URL. So it is. Now if the site is not vulnerable, it filters and the page loads normally. If the site is vulnerable, it would give an error something like this: MySQL syntax error 5 in the article.php on line 15. Or error that says us to check the correct MySQL version or MySQL fetch error. The error may be in any form, but it makes us sure that the site is vulnerable. Finding the number of columns. Our next step is to find the number of columns present in database. For this purpose, we will be using order by at the end of the URL until we get errors. So we make our URL as site.com article.php id is equals to 5 order by 1. This didn't give any error report. Now I increased it to 2. So the URL becomes site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 order by 2. Still we didn't got any error report. So we need to increase until we get the error. In my example, I got error when I pressed the value 3. So the URL becomes site.com/articles.php id is equals to 5 order by 3. This gave me an error report. So this means there are 2 columns in the current table. This is how we find the number of columns. Step 3. Addressing vulnerable path. Now we need to use union statement and find the columns which we can replace so as to see the secret data on the page. For this, we do site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 union all select 1, 2. Now we will see the number on the page somewhere. I mean either 1 or 2 or both 1 and 2 are seen on the page. The number may be displayed anywhere, like in the title of the page or at the bottom of the page. This means we can replace the number with our commands to display the private data that the database holds. In my example, 1 is seen on the page. This means I should replace 1 with my things to proceed further. Step 4. Finding MySQL version. It is necessary to find the MySQL version because if it is 5, our job becomes lot easier. To check the version, there is a function called version closed brackets. So what we need to do is replace 1 with version closed brackets. So the URL becomes site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 union all select version closed brackets, 2. This would return the version of MySQL running on the server. It may be either 4 or 5. Let us think our version is 5. You may check for user or database details etc. by replacing 1 with following: user closed brackets, database closed brackets. Just replace 1 with user closed brackets to know the user details and database closed brackets to know the database details. Now we got MySQL version 5.0.27 standard using version closed brackets in the URL parameter. MySQL version 5 has useful function called information underscore schema. This is the table that holds information about the tables and columns present in the database server. That is, it contains name of all tables and columns of the site. For getting table list, we use table underscore name from information underscore schema dot tables. For getting column list, we use column underscore name from information underscore schema dot columns. So our query for getting the table list in our example would be site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 union all select table underscore name, 2 from information underscore schema dot tables. So this will list all the tables present in the database. Next we need to search for the tables containing username and password information. So we look the probable table with that information. For my example, I would use the table user as a table that contains username and password. Similarly, to get the column list, we would make our query as site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 union all select column underscore name, 2 from information underscore schema dot columns. This returns all the columns present in the database server. Now from the list, we need to look the probable columns for username and password. For my injection, there are 2 columns holding these information. They are username and password respectively. So these are the columns what I want. Now let me show how to display the usernames and passwords stored in the database. There is a function called concat closed brackets that allows me to join the 2 columns and display on the page. Also I am using colon in the hex form. its hex value is 0x3a. So my example becomes site.com/article.php id is equals to 5 union all select concat username comma 0 into 3a comma password comma 2 from table user. This query returns username and passwords like below. Overall view of SQL injection. First we are retrieving tables from information underscore schema. Next we are selecting probable tables from information underscore schema. For example, users, which contain authentication details. From the table users, we are retrieving columns which contain user details like username, password, etc. By using concat, we are finding out usernames and passwords.